Across the polished floor of the high spire, the shadow-clad operative moved with a silence that defied the atmospheric sensors. Beneath the feet of the Umbra unit member, the reflection in the tiles did not move in sync with the body, lagging by a fraction of a second. Before the traitorous attendant could raise the glass shutter, the operative had already crossed 20 feet of open space between two heartbeats. What I recorded in those lower city tunnels remains operationally unverifiable. Some truths are heavy enough to crush those who hear them. Stay close. That specific scent of scorched ozone and frontier grit, high adjunct VOV had first processed 3 solar cycles earlier. Beneath the weight of the summit preparations, the air in the archives had been stagnant, smelling of ancient cooling fluid, and the dry, metallic tang of the station's recycled breath. It was a sensory profile that belonged in a border world trench, not the sterile spire. High adjunct VOV observed the gelatinous ripples across his translucent mantle, a vibration signaling a data anomaly. Logic dictated that a ceremonial object possess a fixed mass, yet the scale recorded a variance of 0.04 grams in the scepter casing. Beside the sensor pod, VOV performed the ritualistic double tap of the interface plate, a gesture of myriad etiquette that preceded high-clearance transmissions. Elora, the High Scion, stood with the terrifying stillness of the Solera hegemony's elite. Between her fingers, she turned a small, smooth stone, a piece of frontier chalk, as if its texture anchored her to a world far removed from the spire's opulence. It was a curious habit, a tactile grounding that VOV categorized as a psychological weakness. From the depths of the encrypted archives rose the Umbra dossier, a file that officially occupied no space. Labeled operationally unverifiable, the record described a unit composed of a species classified as blank. Across the display scrolled a list of missions deemed unservable. 41 times the primary operative had entered conditions where biological expiration was certain. 41 times he had walked out. Impossible. The arithmetic of survival is different for them, Commander Thorne remarked, his voice a gravelly rasp. Behind him stood Ghost 41, a silhouette of matte black tactical weave that drank the ambient light. He was on Outpost Prime when the Syndicate first tested the atmospheric rot, the commander continued. He didn't just survive, he carried 3 other children out on his back. A curious inefficiency marred the operative's posture, a subtle, persistent tilt in the left shoulder as if he were perpetually compensating for a phantom load. To VOV's clinical eyes, such a flaw suggested a musculoskeletal failure that should have grounded the soldier years ago. "I didn't ask for a biography, Commander," Elora interrupted, her voice cutting through the clinical data. "I asked why he is standing in my residential wing." Thorne leaned closer to the Scion, his eyes hard. "Because he is the only variable the Syndicate cannot calculate," he replied. "He's a ghost they built themselves, a shadow peeler who knows their internal leaks before they occur. He doesn't just watch the door, he watches the air itself." Around the room, the myriad attendants rippled in a wave of collective uncertainty. That Kalen had been chosen suggested a link that bypassed official security protocols. For 10 years, the secret surveillance had continued, a process that Elora was only now beginning to dismantle. Through the open doorway stepped the operative, his mechanical gait echoing with a cadence VOV recognized. Beneath the layers of Imperial armor, the movement was a frontier shorthand, a specific way of walking designed to navigate shifting wastes. It was the walk of a man who had negotiated his own ending and simply walked away from the table. Which meant the readings were not wrong. Beneath the spire's beauty, an internal leak had already compromised the residential wing. The myriad analysts focused on political geometry had missed the obvious variable. Behind the stillness of the Umbra operative, a storm was approaching. Gone. Beneath the weight of the political geometry, the briefing room felt smaller, the oxygen levels dipping as the myriad analysts processed the blank classification. According to the psychological load-bearing studies, the human brain possessed no measurable breaking point for trauma, a biological anomaly that VOV had dismissed as fabrication. From the archival display, the arithmetic of survival suggested that humans simply redistributed the weight across their neural architecture. In the corner of the room, Kalen stood with that same shoulder tilt, a structural defect that VOV now realized was not a failure of bone, but a map of every body he had ever carried. "It's just statistics," Kalen said, his voice a flat, frontier-drilled monotone. You carry what you have to until you reach the extraction point. The casual dismissal of 41 unsurvivable missions struck Vav as a cognitive dissonance. For the myriad, a 1% chance of expiration was an immediate cessation of duty. For this human, it was merely Tuesday on the frontier. Across the residential wing, the air grew heavy with the smell of scorched ozone once more. Not a single internal security alarm had been triggered, yet the myriad ripples across Vav's mantle turned a frantic, jagged violet. The scepter casing, the very object Vav had measured, was not a weapon, but a specialized syndicate jammer. Vav adjusted the setting on his archival stylus. The operative peeled himself away from a stone pillar and crossed 20 feet of open floor in the space between two heartbeats to intercept the assassin. Before the traitor could depress the trigger on the scepter casing, the shadow had arrived. The shadow peels from stone and pins the assassin's wrist with a dull crack. Elora did not scream. Through the chaos, she looked at the operative, seeing not a ghost, but the boy who had once carried a 6-year-old named Paya through the atmospheric rot of Outpost Prime. The shoulder tilt was the memory of Paya's weight, a permanent compensation for a life saved. The arithmetic of the frontier was finally clear. The operative wasn't damaged, he was simply full. From the high-clearance archives, the truth of the internal leak finally surfaced, exposing a corruption that reached the Solara hegemony core itself. Irreversible damage had been done to the political geometry of the High Spire. Kalen had known for a decade that his presence would sabotage Elora's claim to the throne, choosing a calculated absence over a comfortable life. He had negotiated his own ending long ago. Inside the secure room of the safe house, the air was still. Elora reached out, her fingers brushing the matte black tactical weave of Kalen's uniform. The scepter casing lay on the table, its weight discrepancy finally explained as the housing for a secret mandate. Outside, the ships of the Solara fleet prepared for the journey to the hegemony core. The left side shoulder compensation remained as Kalen stood by the reinforced door. In his palm, the small piece of frontier chalk was now a fine powder, staining his gloves a ghostly white. The dark corridor beyond the window remained empty of stars. Steel and shadow waited in the silence. The last ship in the fleet was named Remember. End of story. Lens verification tag complete.